I was steaming the navy dress my son always said made me look distinguished when my lawyer's text shattered the quiet call me immediately. By 5 to 12 p.m., I had him on the line, and by 5 to 15 p.m., I was no longer the happiest mother-in-law in America. He told me that the woman my son married did not exist. Not the name, not the career, not the past she'd woven so tenderly into our lives. I stood very still in my small apartment with its cheerful yellow walls and watched the steam fade into the afternoon light, realizing the night ahead would end a marriage and expose a stranger at my family table. 6 months earlier, I believed in happy endings. My name is Margaret Thompson, widowed for 15 years, mother to one wonderful son named James who works too hard and smiles like his late father. When he brought home Cassandra, the pediatric nurse with hazel eyes, perfect manners, and a gift for making an old-fashioned woman feel seen, I thought my prayers had been answered. She called me Mom Thompson. She remembered my decaf after 7 there were p.m., asked about my garden, and updated me on tiny patients I could never meet. She was sun on a cold day, and I leaned toward her warmth when they asked me to help fund the wedding. She squeezed my hand across my kitchen table and said the house I'd kept for 37 years was too much for me now. She painted independence as a generosity to myself and closeness as a promise I'd always have a place with them. I sold the house, gave them $50,000, and watched them dance beneath twinkle lights at a reception that cost $47,000. I contributed $35,000 toward it and told myself that love makes money meaningful. By 5:28 p.m. on that Tuesday, the steam from my iron had cooled and the truth burned in its place. Robert Mitchell has been my attorney since my husband died. He never calls after hours unless a storm is already in the yard. His voice was tight. There was no record of a Cassandra Williams at the Children's Hospital. My mind ran through every story she'd told: Colorado childhood, tragic car accident, rebuilding in a new city and found nothing to hold. The maple outside my window, the one with the bird feeder that brought cardinals through winter, swung peacefully, as if nothing had shifted in the world, but everything had. I drove to James' house with hands that wouldn't quite steady on the steering wheel. The manicured lawn and designer shrubs looked like a magazine spread, purchased with certainty. Once I took comfort in that through the lit window, their silhouettes moved in an easy choreography. I had loved my son teasing, Cassandra laughing, a home softened by the routines that make a life. I sat in the car and let myself feel the grief before I became what the moment required. Then I walked to the door and knocked on the life I thought we shared. James answered first, all warmth and habit. He hugged me, and for a fleeting second, the world righted itself. He looked good, and yet not bone-tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Cassandra appeared in a floral apron over crisp jeans, the embodiment of gracious hosting. She offered wine, mentioned lasagna, and for a breath, I wondered if I'd misheard everything. Then I really looked. The living room bore no trace of my son, no college banner, no antique clock his father left him, not even the painting he saved from our old house. The taste was exquisite and total, a museum curated by someone who preferred her husband to be a guest in his own life. I asked James for a private word. And Cassandra materialized in the doorway at once, smiling a little too brightly, hearing just a little too closely. In his office, the only room that still looked like him, I asked the question that makes honest men exhale. How much did he truly know about his wife's past? He recited the biography I could have told in my sleep, then faltered when I asked for proof. No graduation photos, no colleagues, no friends from before. She took all work calls in the other room. She discouraged visits to the hospital because of policy. Doubt widened in him like a crack through glass. And I hated the pain but trusted what the light revealed. I showed him the investigator's note from Robert, no employment record. A flag on identity, a pattern. The color drained from my son's face, and with it drained the spell Cassandra had woven so expertly. He said he felt suddenly 8 again, asking what to do when the neighborhood bullies changed the rules. We would eat dinner, I told him, because truth arrives best when a table is set and masks are on. Then we would decide how to lift them back in the kitchen. Cassandra plated lasagna with surgical neatness. The tables shone with my good china, my gift to them, flanked by flowers and cloth napkins folded into perfect fans. She chatted about my apartment and asked, so casually, whether I regretted selling the house. I asked, so gently, where the extra $15,000 from the sale had gone beyond the wedding, and what she had once called little improvements. The room hushed. James did quiet arithmetic. Cassandra's fork hovered. She tried a story about student loans. My son remembered their mortgage application with no reported debt. Her smile thinned and reappeared, an actor slipping back into a role. But the stage lights had shifted. For the first time, I saw the woman behind the sweetness watching us for angles rather than affection. The silence at that dining table was heavier than any sermon I'd ever sat through. James's eyes searched his wife's face, confusion tightening into something sharper. Cassandra excused herself to check on dessert, but I noticed she left in too much of a hurry, her shoulders rigid, her steps too quick. The clatter of dishes came from the kitchen, but it didn't feel like the sound of someone preparing tiramisu. It felt like cover. James leaned close, whispering, "Mom, what else did your lawyer find?" My hand shook as I set a folder on the table. I had planned to reveal it carefully, but the moment demanded otherwise. His wife was not Cassandra Williams. Her real name was Catherine Blackwood. She was 34, not 38, with 2 previous marriages that both ended in emptied bank accounts and vanishing acts. My son stared at the documents, as though they were written in a language he wished he couldn't read. "No," he muttered, "this can't be her." But it was. The kitchen had grown quiet, too quiet. James and I stood at the same time, both sensing the shift. We hurried down the hall, only to find the back door ajar and the evening air curling the curtains inward. On the counter, her purse was gone. She ran, James said, but when he checked the driveway, her car was still there. She must have planned an escape, another vehicle waiting nearby. My heart pounded, but then James noticed her phone on the table beside her, untouched. Plate. Unlocked, careless, or confident. We opened the messages, and the truth bloomed uglier than we'd feared. Texts to someone named Marcus. "The old lady is getting suspicious. The account in Phoenix needs more time. Extraction plans soon." My son sank into a chair, his body folding in on itself, while I scrolled through screenshots of his own bank accounts and insurance forms, all carefully photographed and saved. She wasn't only draining him, she was documenting the path to take everything he had. The police arrived within 20 minutes. Detective Rodriguez, sharp-eyed and brisk, treated the scene like an old wound she had seen too many times. She told us Catherine had likely vanished for good, but thanks to Robert's investigator, we might have a head start. Still, the chance of retrieving the stolen $15,000 was slim. Worse. Small, but mine. Chosen, not because someone persuaded me, but because I loved its view of the mountains. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The Financial Crimes Unit estimated that Catherine had stolen more than $2 million in her years of deception. From us, she had taken $50,000, with $15,000 wired to Phoenix, and the rest scattered through accounts designed to vanish. The detective warned recovery would be slim, but by some grace, they managed to freeze enough assets to return nearly 60%. When I held the notice in my hands, I realized the money no longer mattered as much as what we had gained. We had faced her, unmasked her, and ensured she couldn't harm others. One afternoon on my new deck, James handed me a letter from another victim in Colorado. The man thanked us for sharing our story in court, saying it made him feel less foolish for having believed in her. Reading his words, I understood something important. None of us were stupid. We were human. We wanted connection. We trusted. And while that trust had been abused, it also reminded us of what makes life bearable. The belief that love is possible. Catherine had exploited that hope, but she couldn't erase it. James asked me if I ever felt truly happy with her in our lives. Even for a moment, I admitted I had. The happiness wasn't real, but the feeling was, and that distinction mattered. It meant I was still capable of joy, still open to love in whatever form it came, whether from a daughter-in-law who truly cared, or simply from evenings spent laughing with my son over coffee. That, I decided, was worth more than the money she had tried to steal. The day of Catherine's final restitution hearing arrived 6 months after her arrest. The courthouse felt heavy with stories not yet told. Victims sitting shoulder to shoulder, each carrying their own version of the same betrayal. James and I took our place near the front, clutching the evidence folders that had become like unwanted companions. When the bailiff brought her in, shackled, but still upright, I braced myself. Catherine's hair was darker, her face thinner, yet her eyes remained the same, calculating, unyielding, scanning the room as though searching for her next mark. Even in chains, for a fleeting second, I pitied her. To live a life made entirely of masks must be a prison long before the bars close in. But pity quickly hardened into resolve. She had chosen this life, and she had nearly taken ours down with her. Detective Morrison spoke first, outlining her trail of aliases, and the millions siphoned from lonely hearts across 4 states. Then it was my turn. I stood, palms damp but voice steady, and told the court what it felt like to welcome a daughter into my heart, only to learn she was a predator. I described selling my home of 37 years, handing over $50,000, because I believed in love, and watching the woman I trusted vanish into the night. With my faith in humanity clutched tight in her fist, my words weren't polished like the detectives, or legal like Robert's. But they were true, and in the end, that was enough. When I sat down, James squeezed my hand with the same grip he'd once given me before walking into his first-grade classroom. Fearful, but braver for holding on. The judge ordered restitution, though we all knew the money could never fully be recovered. Still, the announcement that nearly 60% of our funds would be returned felt like an unexpected mercy. Catherine barely reacted, her jaw set, her gaze fixed on some horizon beyond us. The sentence would keep her behind bars long enough that she would never again charm her way into another man's life. That knowledge brought more relief than any dollar amount ever could. Life after the trial was quieter, though the echoes of betrayal lingered. James spent long evenings with me on the deck of my new home, sometimes talking, sometimes just letting silence do its work. He admitted that he still felt foolish, still replayed the moment he first saw her smile, and thought it was salvation. I reminded him that foolishness and hope often wear the same clothes, and that choosing to believe in love is never shameful. Slowly, he began to rebuild not just his finances, but his confidence. The man who had once been a shadow in his own home started filling his spaces again with things that were his books, photographs, music that reminded him of who he had been before her. As for me, I discovered strength I didn't know I still carried at 68. Catherine had forced me to remember that instincts are not to be silenced, that loneliness can make us generous to the wrong people, and that protecting the ones we love sometimes means stepping into danger ourselves. Yet she also reminded me that resilience does not age. I had lost a house, but I gained a home that was truly mine. I had lost money, but I recovered trust in myself. Most importantly, I had saved my son from losing everything he owned, and perhaps even his future. One evening, as the sun melted into the mountains and painted the sky in gold and lavender, James turned to me with a tentative smile. "What will you do with the money we get back?" he asked. I thought about it for a long moment. "Some of it will go to a fund for fraud victims," I said finally. "The rest I'll use to take a vacation somewhere warm, where no one knows my story. A place where I can simply be a woman enjoying her retirement, not a survivor recounting her scars." He laughed softly and asked if he could come along. "Of course," I told him, "after everything we've endured. I can't imagine a better traveling companion." As darkness settled around us, I realized that Catherine Blackwood had failed in the one thing she wanted most. She had not broken us. If anything, she had reminded us that real family isn't built on money or appearances, but on truth, resilience, and love that survives betrayal. And in that realization, I found peace. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, please like, share, and subscribe, so more people can hear it. And I would love to know your thoughts. Have you ever trusted someone who turned out to be nothing like they seemed? Share your story in the comments below. Catherine's pattern stretched back years, dozens of men, millions siphoned. I sat beside my son as he stared at the life insurance forms she had prepared for him to sign that very evening, making each other beneficiaries. She said it was romantic, he whispered. I squeezed his hand and said what truth allowed. Nothing says I love you like $1 million payout. It was bitter comfort, but sometimes humor is the only shield left. That night, James asked me a question I wasn't ready for. Had I ever truly liked her? Or had I wanted to? The answer was painful. I told him I'd ignored my instincts because loneliness makes fools of us all. I had been so eager to welcome a daughter into my quiet life that I overlooked the shadows at her edges. He nodded slowly, admitting that he too had felt unease, but he'd silenced it in the name of love. He looked smaller than he ever had in my eyes, but also braver for speaking it aloud. The following morning, Robert summoned us to his office. The atmosphere was no longer legal consultation but war council. A detective from the Multi-State Financial Crimes Unit laid out photos, licenses, and wedding albums. Different men, different names, but always the same woman beneath the disguises. 17 confirmed victims, over $2 million taken, and a career of deception spanning nearly a decade. The revelation that twisted like a knife. Catherine had never stayed with any husband longer than 8 months. With James, she'd lingered nearly a year. Why? Because I existed. Because I had money. James was the entry point. I was the true prize. My chest hollowed at the thought. But anger burned hot enough to fill the space. Detective Morrison proposed a trap. Use me as bait. The mother-in-law, desperate to heal a broken marriage, reaching out with compassion. James rejected it outright. But I knew better. Catherine wouldn't walk away from the money she hadn't yet reached. And if I didn't help, some other mother would fall into her hands. I told my son calmly, it's my choice. He hated it, but he didn't argue further. The truth was simple. If we did nothing, she would strike again. 3 days later, I sat in a coffee shop with a cup of lukewarm tea, waiting for the woman who had called herself my daughter-in-law. She appeared at exactly 2 ounces, RPM. Transformed once more, darker hair, less polish, softer clothes. She sat across from me, tears brimming on command, and spun a story about James's jealousy, his cruelty, his paranoia. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed her. She squeezed my hand, swore she'd never touched my money, and begged for my help. I listened, nodding, and then mentioned the transfer to Phoenix. Her fingers tightened around mine. Her eyes hardened. The mask fell. How much do you really know? She asked coldly. Everything. I told her, and gestured toward the detective who had been waiting nearby. Officers closed in, cuffs gleaming in the afternoon light. Catherine Blackwood didn't fight, but the venom in her glare promised the war wasn't over. As the police car carried her away, I felt an unexpected blend of grief and relief. Grief for the love that had never been real, for the family dinners I'd cherished under false pretenses. Relief that the nightmare was over, at least for us. James came to my side, asking if I was all right. I surprised myself with honesty, better than all right. Finally free. Yet beneath the relief, another truth pulsed. Catherine had taken more than money. She had taken trust. And winning that back would be harder than any courtroom battle. The weeks that followed blurred into paperwork, interviews, and long nights when James sat across from me, silent except for the steady tapping of his fingers against his coffee mug. Catherine, now stripped of her aliases, faced charges across 4 states, but trials and indictments offered little comfort when the house still smelled faintly of her perfume. And her sweater still hung on the back of the couch. Grief for someone who never existed is its own strange ache. I felt it every time I caught James glancing at the empty side of the bed in his photographs, or when I reached for my phone to text Cassie about a recipe, only to remember the number belonged to a thief. Detective Morrison guided us through what he called reconstruction. His team mapped out Catherine's movements, her false employment records, her network of accomplices. One detail chilled me most: every victim she chose had been carefully researched, their promotions noted in business journals, their property values checked, their family ties examined. When I asked how she found the courage to keep repeating the scheme, the detective said flatly, because it kept working. Hearing that truth made me furious. Not just for James and me, but for every man who had believed her, and every family who had paid the price. Then came the revelation that solidified my decision to fight back. Catherine hadn't only wanted James' assets. She had asked me about my estate planning, about whether I'd considered leaving provisions for her if something happened to me at the time. I'd thought she was thoughtful. Now I realized she'd been preparing her final act. The detective said it plainly. She was setting up to make me the ultimate target, perhaps even planning an accident once she secured inheritance. James went pale, and told me I could not risk myself any further, but I had already made my choice. I would be the last woman she ever tried to destroy, so we set the trap. I reached out through one of her false contacts at the hospital, pretending I was confused, not suspicious, desperate to reconcile her with my son. She took the bait, exactly as predicted. At the coffee shop, I watched her shed masks faster than a stage. Actress tears, excuses, affection, and finally that venomous truth when I revealed what we knew. Her arrest was swift, but her glare stayed with me. This isn't over, she'd said, and in a way, she was right. The damage lingered long after the handcuffs closed. Months passed before the hearings began. James and I tried to return to normal. But normal had been stolen. He struggled with guilt, replaying every red flag he'd ignored, while I fought my own shame for giving her so much money, for selling the home where I had raised him, for letting loneliness blind me. Yet slowly, healing came. He started laughing again, tentatively at first. Then with the full warmth I remembered from his childhood. I bought a new house.